Something in you went looking tonight. Out of everything on a screen, you chose a long, slow, dark video about the soul, and I do not think that was boredom. I think you have been carrying a question for a while now, and you have not found anyone to ask. There is an answer. It is 900 years old. And it is not a theory, it is a map, drawn from the letters and the confessions and the prison poetry of people who made this crossing and wrote down what they found on the way. 5 stages. Every soul that goes looking passes through all 5, in order, and almost nobody is told the names in advance, which is why the 4th one destroys people who had no idea it was coming. The awakening, the purification, the illumination, the dark night, and the union. For the next 90 minutes, I am going to walk you through all 5, and at the end of each one, I am going to give you something more useful than a definition. I am going to give you the signs. 3 to 5 specific things you would be experiencing right now if you were standing in that stage. Not ideas, things you would recognize in your own week, which means that somewhere in the next 90 minutes, you are going to hear yourself described. When you reach the one that is yours, stop the video and put the number in the comments. Just the number. You will not be the only one there, and I read them. Now, the road begins where it always begins.
Prologue. The threshold. There is a hunger in us that bread has never answered, a homesickness for a country we have not seen, a summons with no voice in it, and a map. 5 stages, 5 passages that the soul crosses on its way home, named and numbered and written down, not by a dreamer, but by a careful English scholar named Evelyn Underhill, who published them in 1911 in a book she simply called Mysticism. She did not invent them. She read the letters and the confessions and the prison poetry of 800 years of men and women who had made this crossing. And she noticed that they were all describing the same country in different languages. Awakening, purification, illumination, the dark night, and union. That is the whole road. Everything else in the next 90 minutes is detail. And now I'm going to stop saying us, because us is a comfortable word, and this is not a comfortable subject. You picked this. Out of everything on a screen tonight, you picked a slow voice and a long, dark video about the stages of the soul, and you have already given it more of your attention than most people give to prayer in a week. Something in you went looking. I do not think that was an accident, and neither did any of the people you are about to meet. Before we begin, one honest word about what this is. I'm going to name 5 times an old law of reality, a teaching that reached the modern world in a small book printed in Chicago in 1908 under the name of 3 initiates, who claimed they were setting down something far older than themselves, a body of wisdom attributed to Hermes Trismegistus and kept alive in fragments for centuries. The early church knew what to do with wisdom like that. Justin Martyr and Clement of Alexandria looked at the Greek philosophers who had never read a line of scripture and said that even in their darkness, they had caught the shape of something true. Because the word that made the world leaves its fingerprints on every mind that goes looking in earnest. That is exactly how I intend to use it. Not as a substitute for anything you believe. As a lamp held at a strange angle, showing you the same staircase you were already standing on. The road begins where it always begins, with a man who was not looking for it. Chapter 1. The Awakening. The stage where something that was always there becomes, for the first time, unbearable to ignore. In a village called Coma, in Middle Egypt, somewhere around the year 269, a young man of about 18 walked to church on an ordinary morning. We know his name was Antony. We know his parents had recently died and left him a good deal of land along the Nile and a younger sister to look after. We know all of this because a bishop named Athanasius wrote it down about 90 years later. And that account has survived for 16 centuries. Antony was not, on that morning, a seeker. He was a landowner walking to church, the way he had walked to church every week of his life. The gospel was being read aloud as he came in. It happened to be the passage about the rich young man, where Christ says, "Go, sell what you have, give it to the poor, and come, follow me." Antony had heard those words before. He must have heard them a dozen times. Athanasius makes a point of saying that he had always paid close attention in church. But on that morning, the words did not land in his ears. They landed somewhere behind his ears, in a place he did not know he had. He walked out of the church before the service was finished. He gave away the land, all of it. He arranged for his sister's care, and he went out past the last house of the village and kept walking until there were no more houses. That is an awakening. Not the acquisition of new information. The sudden, total, physically inconvenient recognition of information you already had. Now understand what is strange about that story. Because the strangeness is the whole point. Nothing new was said in the room. The same passage was read that had been read for 200 years. The building did not change. The priest did not change. The Egyptian mourning did not change. The only thing that changed was that the veil between Antony and the meaning of those words went thin. Thin enough that the meaning came through. Evelyn Underhill, writing in 1911, noticed this pattern everywhere she looked. The awakening, she found, is almost always abrupt, almost always precisely dated. The people it happens to can usually tell you the month and often the hour. And it almost never arrives as the reward for spiritual effort. It tends to arrive sideways, during something ordinary, to someone who was not asking. Let me give you a second one, because I want you to see how ordinary the trigger can be. And because we are going to need this man again much later tonight, at the very end of this road. In France, in the 1630s, an 18-year-old named Nicholas Herman was standing in front of a tree in winter. Just a tree, stripped, not a leaf on it. And it occurred to him, standing there, that in a few months that dead-looking thing would be covered in leaves, and after the leaves would come flowers, and after the flowers, fruit. That was all. That was the entire event. He said afterwards that this one thought about a bare tree gave him such a view of the providence and the power of God that it was never afterwards erased from his soul, and that it set him loose from the world in a single afternoon. He told this story to a visitor in August of 1666, more than 40 years later, and by then the world knew him by another name. Hold on to him. We will find him again at the end of this road, in the last place on earth you would look for a mystic. Here is the law underneath this stage, and I will say it once. The oldest of the Hermetic sayings holds that all of this, the sand, the tree, the Nile, the winter, is not first of all material. That reality is, in its foundation, mind. That the world is a thought before it is a thing, held in a mind that never stops thinking it. Mentalism, that teaching is called. And a churchgoer should feel entirely at home here, because the Gospel of John opens by saying it outright. In the beginning was the Word, not the atom, not the void. The Word, the thought, the utterance, the intention, and everything that exists came into being through it. Which means your awakening was never you making contact with something distant. It was you noticing for one unguarded moment that you have been living inside a thought your whole life, and that the thought is aware of you. Now, I have to say something to a particular person watching. And if it is not you, give me 90 seconds and we will move on. You may be listening to all of this and quietly concluding that you do not qualify, that nothing has ever cracked open for you. No morning in a church, no tree in winter, no date you could name. Just a long, low, persistent sense that there is more, and no fireworks whatsoever to prove it. Underhill saw you coming. She was careful to record that for a great many people, the awakening is not a lightning strike at all. It is a slow dawn, spread over years, so gradual that the person living through it has no single moment to point at, and is therefore inclined to think nothing has happened. She thought that kind was, if anything, the sturdier of the two. Because a house lit by dawn stays lit, and a house lit by lightning is dark again by morning. The test is not whether you are knocked off a horse. The test is whether you have become unable to be satisfied by things that used to satisfy you. That is the mark. That is the whole mark. And there is one more thing about this stage that people rarely say out loud, so I will say it. The awakening hurts. Not in the moment. In the moment, it is very often joy. And Underhill notes how consistently the accounts describe exaltation, sweetness, and almost embarrassing gladness. The pain comes about a week later, when you look at your life with the new eyes and you can see, with total clarity, everything in it that is going to have to go. Anthony walked out of that church, and the joy lasted him all the way to the edge of the village. But somebody had to tell his sister. Somebody had to explain to the neighbors why the good Nile land was being given away by a boy of 18. There is always a morning after the awakening, and on that morning you are the one who has to do the explaining. So, signs that you are standing in the awakening. 1. Something you have heard your entire life, a verse, a hymn, a line of a prayer you could recite half asleep, suddenly opened up under you like a floor giving way. Same words, completely different building. 2. You have begun to find the things you are good at slightly embarrassing. Not because anyone criticized them, because a scale you did not authorize has quietly recalibrated, and the achievements are still there, but they no longer weigh anything. 3. There is a specific date. You may not have told anyone the date, but you know it, and you know what you were doing, and you know that you have been measuring time from it ever since. 4. You have started to be moved, unreasonably, by small, ordinary things. Light on a wall, a bare tree, the sound of someone else's child laughing 2 streets away. You are aware that this reaction is disproportionate. You are aware that you cannot stop it. 5. You are lonely in a new way. Not for company, because you may have plenty of company. You are lonely for someone who has been where you have just been, and you have started to suspect that the people around you would not know what you were talking about if you tried. If 3 or more of those landed, you are in the first stage, and you should know that it is the shortest one. Because here is what nobody warns you about the awakening. It does not last. The light that came through the thin place does not stay. The verse closes back up. The bare tree goes back to being a bare tree. And you will spend a period of time, sometimes years, trying to get back into a room you did not know you were in the first time. Anthony walked into the desert, lit up like a lamp. Within a very short time, he was in the worst trouble of his life. And it was not lions, and it was not thieves, and it was not hunger. It was something the desert fathers gave a specific name to. They said it came at a specific hour of the day. And every single person who has ever tried to keep hold of a light like that has met it. Chapter 2. The Purification. The stage where the light that woke you goes quiet, and the work begins. Around the year 380, in a scatter of monastic cells called Kelia in the Egyptian desert, there was a man named Evagrius, who had come from Pontus on the Black Sea and who had been, before all this, a brilliant and rising churchman in Constantinople. He had thrown that life away deliberately. He had come to the sand to be made clean. And in the sand, Evagrius did something that nobody had quite done before. He watched himself, carefully, the way a physician watches a patient, and he wrote down what he found. He catalogued 8 thoughts that come to the soul that is trying to be purified. 8 recurring assaults, which his student John Cassian carried west, and which the Latin Church eventually reshaped into the list of deadly sins that you already know. But Evagrius said one of the 8 was worse than all the others. He called it the most oppressive of them, and he gave it a name that has no clean English translation: Oxadia. He noticed something about when it came. It arrived, he wrote, around the 4th hour, and it besieged the soul until the 8th, which in the reckoning of the desert means it came at mid-morning and stayed through the whole white blaze of the afternoon. Because of that timing, and because of a line in the 91st Psalm about the destruction that lays waste at noonday, they gave it a second name: the noonday demon. Here is what Evagrius says it does to a man, and I want you to listen to this with your own life in mind rather than a monk's. It makes the hours stop moving. He describes the monk going to the door of the cell to look at the sun, to see whether it is any nearer to setting, and going back inside and coming out again. It fills him with contempt for where he is and the people he is with. It convinces him that holiness is happening somewhere else, in some other monastery, under some better teacher, and that if he could only get there, all of this would work. It makes him despise the work in front of him and long for the work he has not been given. And underneath all of it runs a single quiet suggestion, which is to leave. 1600 years ago, in a desert, without electricity, without a phone, a man in a stone box described the exact texture of a Tuesday afternoon when the faith has gone flat and everything in you wants to be somewhere else. That is the purification, not fire, boredom. Now, why does it happen? Why does a God who woke you up so beautifully hand you 3 years of gray? The mystics are unanimous on the mechanism, and I want to give it to you plainly, because it is the single most useful thing in this chapter. The light did not leave. Your capacity to enjoy it left. When the awakening came, it came as sweetness, as feeling, as tears, as an almost physical warmth. And you did what any of us would do. You began to love the sweetness. You began, without ever deciding to seek the consolation rather than the one who was sending it. St. John of the Cross, writing in Spain in the 1570s, described this with the bluntness of a man who had watched it happen to himself. He said the beginner in the spiritual life is like a child who loves the gifts, and that a soul must eventually be weaned, or it will spend its entire life mistaking the taste of grace for grace itself. So the sweetness is withdrawn, not as punishment, as weaning. And what remains when it is withdrawn is a person praying into a dry room with no reward attached, which is the first time in your life that you find out whether you wanted God or wanted how God made you feel. Evelyn Underhill called this stage purgation, and she was direct about its content. It is, she wrote, a stripping, a sustained detachment from everything the self has been leaning on. undertaken not because those things are evil, but because the self has been resting its weight on them. The furniture is not wicked. The furniture is simply in the way. There is a second witness worth calling here, and she is the most practical writer in this whole tradition. In 1577, a Spanish Carmelite named Teresa of Avila sat down and wrote a book describing the soul as a castle made of a single diamond, with many rooms, and God dwelling in the innermost chamber. She was writing for her own nuns, and she had no patience whatsoever for spiritual daydreaming. What all she says about the outer rooms is worth the whole book. She says the light of the innermost chamber does reach the outer rooms. It simply cannot be seen there, because of what has got in and made a home in them. The soul in the outer rooms, she says, is so preoccupied with what has crawled in from outside that it cannot attend to the light at all. That is purification in one image. You are not being asked to earn entry. You are being asked to clear the room. And this is where the old law of this stage becomes useful. The Hermetic teaching holds that nothing in creation moves in a straight line, that everything measures out. Everything swings. There is an outflow and a backflow to all things, a rise and a fall. And the measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm, that law is called. And the churchgoer has known this since childhood, because it is written in Ecclesiastes in words most of us learned before we understood them. To everything a season, a time to plant and a time to pluck up, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, which tells you what the dryness actually is. The dryness is not the absence of the season. The dryness is a season. It has a length. It is measuring something out. And the swing that took you into it is precisely the swing that will take you out, which means the depth of your emptiness now is telling you, if you can bear to hear it, the height of what is being prepared. Before the signs, one piece of care, because this is the stage where the tradition is most often misused. Dryness in prayer and depression are not the same thing, and the mystics knew it. John of the Cross was a spiritual director with real people in front of him, and he refused to let anyone call their condition a dark night on the strength of feeling bad. He laid down conditions. He said, look for 3 things together, not one. First, that the flatness is not selective. The person is finding no satisfaction in God and no satisfaction in ordinary pleasures either. So it can't be explained by simple distraction. Second, that the memory keeps returning to God anyway, with a kind of anxious carefulness, and that the person is worried they are failing rather than relieved to be free. Third, that they cannot pray in the old way, cannot reason it out, cannot picture it, cannot work it up, even though they are still willing to try. All 3 together. Anything less, he said, and you are looking at something else. And I want to be plain with you here. In a way, this tradition sometimes is not. 16th century Spain did not have a word for a chemical imbalance. We do. If what you are living inside is not a season but a weight, if it sits on your body as well as your prayer, if it has taken your sleep and your appetite and your ability to care about anyone, if it has been there for months without a floor, that is not something to romanticize as a mystical passage. That is something to take to a doctor. And taking it to a doctor is not a failure of faith. Grace works through medicine the same way it works through bread. The purification is real. It is also not an excuse to suffer alone in a room without help. Signs that you are standing in the purification. 1. Prayer has become work, not agony, work. Like writing letters to an address you are no longer certain is occupied, and doing it anyway because stopping feels worse than continuing. 2. Things you used to be able to enjoy without a second thought have gone strange in your mouth. Not forbidden, just flat. You still reach for them out of habit, and you are quietly startled every time by how little is there. 3. You have caught yourself constructing an escape. A different city, a different church, a different life, a different person. Some arrangement in which all of this would finally come right. Evagrius watched a man walk to the door and look at the sun. You have a version of that door, and you know exactly where it is. 4. The failings that have surfaced in you lately are not the interesting ones. They are small, ugly, domestic, and repetitive. And you had believed, with some confidence, that you were well past them. This is normal. The awakening raised the light in the room. You are simply seeing the floor. 5. Time has changed texture. Afternoons have become long. There is a specific hour of the day that you have started to dread, and it is not the night. If that is where you are, understand 2 things before we go on. You are not backsliding, and this stage is not indefinite, because the pendulum swings, and when it swings back, it does not return you gently to where you were. Every single account we have of what comes next uses the same word, and it is not peace, and it is not comfort. It is fire. On a Monday night in the autumn of 1654, in a rented room in Paris, one of the finest mathematical minds in Europe was about to spend 2 hours finding that out. Chapter 3. The Illumination. The stage where the light comes back, and comes back changed. On Monday, the 23rd of November, 1654 in Paris, a man of 31 sat down alone in his room. His name was Blaise Pascal. By that age, he had already invented a mechanical calculating machine, done foundational work on pressure and the vacuum, and laid the groundwork of probability theory in an exchange of letters with Fermat. He was one of the most formidable minds in Europe, and he knew it. At about 10:30 that night, something happened to him. It lasted approximately 2 hours. It ended at about midnight. And we know these times with this precision for one reason only, which is that when it was over, Pascal reached for a scrap of parchment and wrote it down. The first word he wrote, sitting alone on a line by itself, was fire. What follows on that parchment is not an argument, which for Pascal is remarkable. It is a stammering. He writes down certitude, and then writes it a second time, as though once were not enough to hold it. He names the God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, and then adds, with an edge unmistakably aimed at the men he had spent his whole life among, that this was not the God of the philosophers and the scholars. Further down the parchment, the word joy appears 3 times in a row, with nothing between the repetitions to hold them apart, and then a 4th time with the word tears in front of it. He told nobody, not one person, for the rest of his life. But he did one thing, and it is the most instructive thing in this entire chapter. He sewed the parchment into the lining of his coat, and for the next 8 years, every time he had a new coat made, he unpicked the lining of the old one, took the parchment out, and sewed it back into the new. It was found by a servant preparing his body for burial in 1662. Now hold that image, because it tells you the entire nature of the 3rd stage. A man who has touched the living God does not need a note in his coat to remember it. Nobody forgets fire. Unless, and Pascal, who was nobody's fool, understood this perfectly. Unless the fire is not something you own. and unless the ordinary daylight mind closes back over it within weeks, and unless you can stand in the same room a year later and find that the most important 2 hours of your life have gone thin and papery and are beginning to look from the inside like something you might have imagined. He was not preserving the memory. He was building a scaffold under it. This is illumination, and here is what it actually consists of. Evelyn Underhill was careful about it, and modern readers usually get her wrong. Illumination is not union. She is unmistakable on this point. In illumination, the self is flooded with light, and the world is transfigured, and prayer becomes effortless and often wordless. And there is a joy that the person will spend the rest of their life failing to describe. But the self is still standing there. There is still a watcher. There is still a me having the experience, delighted, grateful, and this is the part nobody admits, quietly taking notes. The gap has narrowed to almost nothing. It has not closed, which is why this stage, glorious as it is, cannot be the destination, and why what comes after it comes at all. Meister Eckhart, preaching in German to ordinary people in Cologne and Strasbourg 600 years before Underhill wrote, said the thing that got him into a great deal of trouble. He taught that there is something in the ground of the soul that is not made, a spark, he called it, uncreated and uncreatable, and that God is closer to that place in you than you are to yourself. He was investigated for it. In March of 1329, a year or so after his death, 28 propositions drawn from his preaching were condemned by papal bull. Whatever the theologians made of his phrasing, the pastoral point survived, and it is the key to this stage. The light in illumination is not delivered to you from outside. It is uncovered, which brings us to the old law that governs this passage, and I will name it once. The Hermetic teaching holds that nothing in creation rests, that everything is in motion, always, down to the last grain of the last stone, and that what makes one thing different from another is not what it is made of, but the degree of that motion. Raise the motion far enough and matter stops behaving like the matter. Vibration, that law is called. And I want to strip that word of everything the last 50 years have done to it. Because the scriptures got there first and said it better. God is light, John writes, and in him is no darkness at all. The prophet Isaiah sees the throne attended by creatures whose Hebrew name simply means the burning ones. Moses comes down from the mountain, and his face is shining so violently that the people cannot look at him, and he has to go about veiled. On a mountain in Galilee, 3 fishermen see their teacher's clothing turn white beyond any bleaching, and the account is careful to say that nothing was added. The light came out from inside him. So when the illumination comes, do not think that something has been given to you. You have been raised, briefly, to the pitch at which what was always burning becomes visible. 2 warnings before the signs, and they are the reason this chapter is dangerous. The first concerns what often arrives alongside the light. Underhill devotes real space to it. The voices, the visions, the words heard that nobody spoke. The images that come with a weight of authority the ordinary imagination cannot manufacture. She does not sneer at these. She takes them seriously as genuine events in the life of the soul. But John of the Cross, who is the most experienced guide any of us have on this ground, is close to ruthless about them. Do not seek them, he says. Do not ask for them. And when they come, do not lean on them, because the soul that begins collecting these things has quietly swapped the giver for the gifts a second time. And it is much harder to notice the second time, because now the gifts are holy. The second warning is larger. and it is why the Church has always watched this stage closely. Illumination is where most people stop, not out of laziness, out of satisfaction, which is far more difficult to escape. The light is real. The joy is real. The fruit in the life is often visible to everybody. And a person can build an entire spiritual identity in this stage and stay there for 40 years. They become, very often, the warmest person in the room and the one everybody goes to. And they have earned it. And the self is still standing there. Narrower, kinder, cleaner, and still standing there, still holding the experience, still in some final, unexamined room, the owner of its own holiness. That last thing cannot be reasoned away, and it cannot be repented away, because the part of you that would do the repenting is the part that has to go. It has to be taken, and you will not consent to it in the light. Signs that you are standing in the illumination. 1. Prayer stopped being something you compose. Words became unnecessary and then slightly obstructive, and you found you could sit for 40 minutes in what an outsider would call an empty room and come out of it fed. 2. The physical world has gone luminous on you. Not metaphorically. You have stood still in a supermarket car park because of the way the light was falling, and you were embarrassed, and you did not move. 3. People have started saying you seem different, and they cannot say how, and you have not told them anything. 4. Fear has gone unusually quiet, not solved. Quiet. Things that used to run you have simply lost their grip, and you have not been working on them. 5. You have begun to be able to love a specific person you previously found unlovable, and you did not decide to. It arrived, and it frightened you a little, because you know you are not the sort of person who does that. Stay in that as long as it lasts. Write it down, the way Pascal did, and put it somewhere you will find it, because it will not last. And when it goes, it will not go the way the first sweetness went in the purification. Slowly, gently, leaving you dry but functional. It will go out like a lamp in a corridor. Every serious account of this road agrees that the hardest passage does not come at the beginning, when you are weakest. It comes here, after the light, when you are strongest. And there is a reason for that. And the reason is the cruelest and most merciful thing in this entire tradition. In December of 1577, in the city of Toledo, a Spanish friar was about to be locked in a room 6 feet wide, and to write in that room the most exact description of this passage ever set down in any language. Chapter 4. The Dark Night. The stage the whole road is named for, and the only one you will be tempted to call a mistake. On the night of the 2nd of December, 1577, in Avila, a group of men came for a 35-year-old friar called Juan de Yepes. They were not soldiers. They were not heretics. They were his own brothers in religion, Carmelites of the unreformed observance, who had had enough of him and of the reform he had been carrying out with Teresa of Avila. They seized him, and they took him to their priory in the city of Toledo, and they put him in a room. The room was about 6 feet by 10. It had been a latrine. It had one small opening high up, so that for most of the day he could not read and could barely see his own hands. He was given bread and water. He was brought out periodically to be flogged in front of the assembled community, and the marks of it were on his back for years. He was there for 9 months. Nobody came. The world outside carried on. His own order had decided he was a problem, and for the better part of a year he was, functionally, a man who had been deleted. And in that room, in the dark, without paper for much of it, holding the lines in his memory until he could get them down. Juan de Yepes composed the poetry that would make him one of the great writers in the Spanish language, and the map that every serious traveler on this road has used ever since. In the middle of August, 1578, he tore his bedding into strips, knotted them, worked loose the fastening of a window, and lowered himself down the wall in the dark. He got out. But the room did not leave him, and thank God for that. Because when he wrote his commentary years afterward at Granada, he had something to write it from. Now, what is this stage actually made of? Start with what it is not. It is not the dryness of chapter 2. In the Purification, the sweetness was withdrawn, and you were left with a flat, workable, slightly gray faith. Unpleasant, but you could still locate yourself in it. You still knew who you were and what you were doing. The dark night takes the locating. John distinguishes two of these passages, and this is the distinction most people miss. The first he calls the night of sense, and it is the earlier and lesser one. The stripping of appetite and consolation, the weaning. That is roughly where the purification sits. The second he calls the night of the Spirit. And it does not come for your comforts. It comes for the apparatus you use to know God at all. Understanding goes first. The theology you have carried since childhood is still true, and you can still recite it. But it has stopped conducting anything. It has become furniture. Then memory. The luminous moments, the awakening, the fire, the year everything was gold, do not merely fade. They become suspect. You begin to wonder, with a cold and reasonable sounding voice, whether you constructed all of it. And then the will. Not that you choose to stop. You cannot get purchase on the choice at all. You go to pray, and it is like reaching for a handle that has been taken off the door. What is left is a person who still, somehow, will not walk away, and who could not tell you why, and who has no evidence whatsoever that anyone is listening. Underhill called this the great swing back into darkness. The passage that divides what she named the first mystic life from the second. Not a detour off the road, the hinge in the middle of it. Here is John's own image for what is happening, and it is the single most useful thing anyone has ever said about this stage. Take a wet log and put it into a fire. The fire does not immediately make it beautiful. The fire's first work on that log is to blacken it, to make it hiss and steam and stink and sweat out everything it has absorbed. The log becomes uglier, darker, and less like itself than it has ever been. And every one of those effects is being produced by the fire. Then, at some point that cannot be pinpointed from outside, the log stops resisting the fire and starts being the fire. There was never a moment when the fire went out. So the darkness of this passage is not the withdrawal of God. John says the opposite, in words that have kept people alive for 400 years. The darkness, he says, is caused by an excess of light, a light too strong for the faculty receiving it. In the way that a man who walks out of a cellar into full noon does not see more, he sees nothing at all, and would swear on his life that he had been blinded rather than illuminated. You are not in the dark because he left. You are in the dark because he came closer than your equipment can register. Which brings us finally to the law of this passage, and it is the sternest of the five. The Hermetic teaching holds that there is no such thing as chance, that every effect standing in front of you has a cause standing behind it, whether or not you are positioned to see the cause, and that what men call luck is only a name for a law they have not traced. Cause and effect, that law is called. And the letter to the Hebrews says the same thing to a frightened congregation, and says it more tenderly. Whom the Lord loves, he disciplines. No discipline seems pleasant at the time. Afterward, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. And in John's Gospel, the vine dresser walks the rows with a knife, and the branch he cuts back hardest is not the barren one. The barren branch is removed, the fruitful branch is cut. Which means this, and I want you to hold it very carefully. If you are in the dark night, you are not there because you failed. You are there because you got far enough along to be worth pruning. The severity of this passage is not evidence against you. It is a measurement of what is being made. And if all of this feels like something that only happened to friars in stone cells 4 centuries ago, let me bring it into a room you can picture. In September of 2007, 10 years after her death, a collection of private letters was published. They had been written over decades to a handful of spiritual directors, and most of them the author had asked to have destroyed. The church kept them because a cause for canonization requires it. The letters were Mother Teresa's, and what they disclose is that from roughly 1948, which is to say from almost the exact moment she began the work in Calcutta that made her the most recognizable Christian on earth, until very near the end of her life, she experienced an interior darkness that never substantially lifted. Close to 50 years of it. She wrote to her directors about the absence of God with a candor that shocked people when it was printed. And she wrote it while running a religious order across 130 countries and being photographed smiling. Some commentators read that as a hidden loss of faith. The people who actually knew the tradition read it correctly on the first morning because they had seen the shape before. Underhill described it in 1911. John of the Cross had mapped it in the 1570s. What the letters record is not a woman who stopped believing. It is a woman who spent half a century in the passage we are standing in tonight, and who kept working anyway, and who told almost nobody. I mention it for exactly one reason. You may have assumed that the dark night is a thing that happens to failures. It is very often the thing that happens to the ones doing the most good, and it very often happens while they are doing it. And the two facts are not unrelated. Signs that you are standing in the dark night. 1. The old certainties have not been argued away. Nobody defeated you in a debate. They simply stopped carrying weight, the way a rope you have used for years goes slack in your hand without ever visibly breaking. 2. You are more afraid of your own memories than of your doubts. The fear is not that God does not exist. The fear is that the best moments of your life were something you did to yourself. 3. You are still doing it. Still turning up. Still opening the book. Still saying the words into a room that gives you nothing back. And you cannot explain to anyone, including yourself, why you have not stopped. 4. You have lost the ability to perform. You can no longer produce the feeling for other people, and the effort of pretending has become physically exhausting, and some part of you is relieved about that. 5. Comfort has stopped working. When someone offers you the verse, the reassurance, the reminder of what you used to know, it goes past you like weather, and you feel guilty about that, and you thank them anyway. If that is you tonight, hear this next part, because it is the only instruction in 90 minutes. Do not do this alone. John of the Cross had Teresa of Avila. Every guide in this tradition, without exception, insists that the night of the Spirit is the one passage a soul should not attempt in isolation. not because the darkness is dangerous in itself, but because a person in it loses the ability to assess their own condition and needs someone standing outside it who can. Find one person, a priest, a director, an old believer with a steady temperament, someone who has been through it and come out unimpressed with themselves. Tell them the truth. You do not need them to fix it. You need them to be able to see you and know how it ends. It does not end with an answer. Nobody in this entire tradition reports getting an explanation. It ends the way the log ends. At some hour you could not name afterwards, the resistance is simply gone, and what is left is not a person who has understood God. It is a person who has stopped needing to be a separate thing in order to be near Him. And when that happens, the strangest detail in this whole story is where it puts you. Not on a mountain, not in a vision. In a kitchen, in Paris, over a sink full of pots, with a man we met 80 minutes ago, standing in front of a bare tree in winter. Chapter 5. The Union. The stage that almost nobody predicts correctly, because everybody expects a mountain and it turns out to be a kitchen. Return with me to Paris and to the young man in front of the bare tree. His name, remember, was Nicolas Herman. After that winter afternoon, he did not go into a monastery. He went into the army and then into service as a footman to a treasurer named Fiobert. And by his own cheerful account, he was a large, clumsy man who broke things. He was, on paper, unpromising. Eventually, he did enter religion as a lay brother with the Discalced Carmelites in Paris, the same reformed order that Teresa and John of the Cross had built. And he took the name Lawrence of the Resurrection. They put him in the kitchen. He admitted freely that he had no natural liking for the work whatsoever. He was there for years, decades. Pots, water, meals, the whole grinding domestic churn of feeding a house of men 3 times a day, every day, for the rest of his life. And in August of 1666, a visitor sat down with him and started writing down what he said. And what he said has never gone out of print in 350 years. He said that he had stopped keeping appointed hours for prayer because he no longer needed them. He said that the busiest moment in the kitchen, with several people calling for several different things at once, did not disturb him. He said, and this is the sentence the whole tradition turns on, that he was as near to God among his pots and pans as he was kneeling at the sacrament. That is the 5th stage. And notice what is missing from it. There is no ecstasy in that kitchen. No fire, no parchment, no visions, no light on the wall. Pascal's night was 2 hours of unbearable glory. Brother Lawrence's union was 40 years of washing up. The difference is that Pascal had to sew his into his coat, and Lawrence did not need to write his down at all, because it had stopped being an experience that happened to him and become the ordinary condition he lived in. Evelyn Underhill called this the unitive life. And she was insistent about one thing that people still get backwards. Union is not retirement. She went looking, deliberately, at what the great contemplatives actually did after they arrived. And the answer embarrassed the popular idea of mysticism. Teresa of Avila crossed Spain in carts on bad roads, founding convents and arguing with officials. Catherine of Siena wrote to popes and princes and got results. Antony's flight into the sand did not empty the desert. It filled it. And monasticism, as the West received it, came out of that. The soul that has arrived does not float away from the world. It comes back, and it can finally be useful, because for the first time, there is nobody in the way, which is why the mark of this stage is not intensity. It is that the person has become quiet, and steady and slightly difficult to impress, and enormously easy to be around. They are no longer defending anything. They have stopped performing. And they stopped so long ago that they have forgotten they used to. The last of the old laws is the one everybody has heard and almost nobody has understood. The Hermetic teaching holds that the pattern which governs the greatest things also governs the least. That there is one design running from the highest order of reality down through every smaller order, unchanged in shape, changed only in scale. As above, so below. As below, so above. Correspondence, that law is called. And every believer on earth has been praying it since childhood, in the only prayer Christ actually taught. Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. On earth as it is in heaven. The same will, the same pattern, running down the whole ladder from the throne to the kitchen floor. Let me finish it with one more witness. An Englishwoman, in May of 1373. She lived in Norwich, and we do not know her real name because she took the name of the church she was walled into. She was about 30. She fell gravely ill. She was given the last rites. And while she lay there expecting to die, she received a series of 16 showings, which she spent the next 20 years turning over. In one of them, she said, something small was placed in the palm of her hand, round, like a ball, about the size of a hazelnut. She looked at it and asked what it was, and the answer she was given was that it was everything that has ever been made. And she said she marveled that it could last at all because it looked so small and so easily lost. And the answer came back that it lasts and always will for one reason only, which is that God loves it. That is correspondence. The whole created order held in one hand, kept in being by love. The greatest thing and the smallest thing turning out to have the same shape. And it is also union, exactly as Brother Lawrence found it. Not the soul escaping the world. The soul finally able to see what the world is made of while standing in a kitchen with wet hands. Signs that you are standing in the union. 1. The question of whether you are making progress has stopped occurring to you. Not resolved. It simply does not arise anymore, and you noticed its absence long after it left. 2. You can be interrupted, constantly, by people who need things, and the interruptions no longer feel like they are taking you away from something. 3. Other people's spiritual experiences no longer provoke anything in you. No envy, no measuring, no quiet ranking of yourself against them. You are simply glad, in a plain and uncomplicated way, that it happened to them. 4. You have become far less interested in explaining yourself. You have things you know and could defend, and you find you would mostly rather not. And this is not weariness. It is that the need to be understood has quietly gone. 5. Ordinary work has become the place where you are most at home. Washing up, driving, waiting in a queue. The things that used to be the gaps between the important parts of your life have turned out to be where you actually live now. There is a counterfeit of this stage, and the tradition names it. So I will too. Numbness can look like peace from the outside. A person who has simply given up wanting anything can present very much like a person who has stopped needing anything. And both of them are quiet, and both of them are hard to provoke. The difference is warmth. Resignation goes cold. It stops caring about the queue and the neighbor and the meal, because it has stopped caring at all. Union goes the other way. It becomes more attentive to small things, not less. More patient with tedious people, not more distant from them. Brother Lawrence in that kitchen was not numb. He was noticeably, irritatingly cheerful about pots. If what you have arrived at has made you smaller and colder, that is worth taking to someone. If it has made you steadier and kinder and quite hard to offend, you may be further along this road than you have given yourself credit for. One last thing before I let you go, and it is the thing I most want you to take with you. This road is not a staircase. You will not climb these 5 and be finished. Every soul that is written about this reports the same structure, which is that you go round again, a second awakening, a second stripping, a second darkness. Each turn at a different depth, each one carrying you round the same 5 stations. Underhill saw it. John of the Cross assumed it. The tradition is unanimous. Which means that if you recognized yourself in chapter 4 tonight, and you have been there before, you are not going backwards. You are going round, and the wheel is going down as it turns into ground that was there all along. Benediction. So here is the whole road, laid down one last time, and then I will leave you in the quiet. You woke, and it was not your doing, and it came sideways, on an ordinary morning, through words you had heard 100 times. You were stripped, and it felt like failure, and it was weaning. You were lit, and it did not last, and it was never meant to be a residence. You were taken into the dark, and he had not gone anywhere. You had simply been brought nearer than your eyes could bear. And at the end of it, there is a kitchen, and a bare tree that will be in leaf by spring, and something small and round in the palm of a hand that turns out to be everything there is, held together by nothing but love. Awakening, purification, illumination, the dark night, and union. Wherever this found you tonight, and I suspect it found you somewhere specific, or you would not have stayed. You are not lost, and you are not late, and you are not the first. 800 years of people have walked this before you, and they left the map behind on purpose, because they knew somebody would come after them in the dark and need it. Go gently. The light you are looking for has been looking for you the whole time, and it is much closer than the road makes it seem.